Okay, good day. Welcome to another English class. Today we'll be looking at a very interesting topic. You know that grammar is usually a dicey one, so looking at this will actually help us a long way to know how best we can apply the voice, that's the form of a verb, needed at every particular point in time. So today we'll look at active and passive voice. Active and passive voice. Now we'll kick off by looking at our lesson objective, which says by the end of the lesson, students should be able to define voice, very necessary, define active and passive voice, then change active voice to passive voice or passive to active. Now let's look at the definition of voice. What is voice? Now by voice we do not refer to what one speaks with. No, that's not the angle we're looking at. Rather we're looking at it from the grammatical aspect, and we say that voice is a form of a verb that indicates when a grammatical subject performs the action or is the receiver of an action. Now I would like to take us a little bit back to elements of a sentence. When we talk about elements of a sentence, we look at the subject, you look at the complement, you look at object, you look at adverbials, and we consider all of these as what make up a sentence. Though sometimes when we make a sentence, all the elements may not be there, but it is striking for us to understand that the subject and the verb are very necessary in a sentence. Before we would say that something is a sentence or group of words is a sentence, that means it must have the subject and the verb. Alright, so when the subject performs the action, when the grammatical subject performs the action, then we could say it's a voice. Then when also the subject, the grammatical subject receive the action, is the receiver of an action, we could as well say it's a voice. Then primarily voice has to do with the form of a verb. Now the form of a verb could be in the present, it could be in the past, it could be in the continuous, alongside with our auxiliary verbs, or what we call verb to be. Now when a sentence is written in the active voice, the subject performs the action. When a sentence is in its active voice, the subject performs the action. But when it's in the passive voice, the subject receives the action. Now, primarily we know that objects are receivers of actions, while subjects are doers of actions. Now, for a subject to be the receiver of an action, that means we have changed the voice. By virtue of a change of verb, the subject begins to receive the action, while the object which ought to receive the action primarily, it's now the doer of the action. So in academic writing, it is generally preferred to choose the active verb and pair it with the subject that names the person or the thing doing or performing the action. In academic writing, it's best, what we're saying primarily is that it's best for us to write in the active voice rather than in the passive voice. Why do we say so? The active voice is more emphatic. Yes, it's stronger than the passive voice. It gives the information directly, but the passive doesn't do that. Now we have an example here which says active. The award-winning chef prepares each meal with loving care. The award-winning chef prepares each meal with loving care. Now this is in the active voice. Now the chef is the subject, and we'll have to change it because the voice has to change. So since we are going to change the voice of the sentence from active to passive, we would see that the chef will now become the receiver of the action, while each meal will be the subject, while the chef is the object. Now here in the passive we have each meal is prepared with loving care by the award-winning chef. Now when we talk about voice, we talk about the verb, the change of the verb. We already have it there in our definition that voice refers to a form of a verb. So the form of a verb is what indicates whether the subject will be the doer of the action or the subject will be the receiver of the action. So once you want your subjects to become the objects, apparently, the voice has to change. And that means the verb form will change. Now, in the above example of an active sentence, the simple subject is chef and prepares is the verb. The chef prepares each meal with loving care. In the passive sentence, meal is a simple subject and is prepared is the verb. You see that the voice has changed. In the active voice, we had prepares, but now because we want to change the voice from active to passive, the verb form has to change. And we have changed the verb form to is prepared. Initially, we have the verb form as simple present tense, but here we have changed it to simple past tense. All right, so we'll move on. It says each meal is prepared by the award-winning chef. In effect, the object of the active sentence becomes the subject in the passive sentence. Although both sentences have the same basic components, their structure remains or makes them different from each other. Thus, they have the same component, the basic components are the same. But when we talk about the structure, there is difference in the structure. By structure, we refer to a change in the formation of a sentence. So active sentences are about what people or things do. That's what an active sentence tells you. An active sentence tells you about what people or things do, while in the passive, the sentences are about what happens to people or things. The chef prepares, that's what the person does. Remember, it says active sentences tell us about what people or things do. So the chef prepares, that's what the chef does. While in the passive, it tells us what happens to the chef. The meal is prepared by the chef. All right, let's look at using the auxiliary verb be. Now, when we talk about auxiliary verb, we refer to helping verbs. In English language, verbs are highly important. As a matter of fact, the meaningfulness of a sentence is dependent on the verb. Once a verb is removed in a sentence, there is no sentence, so to speak. What we have would be phrases and normal sentences. So as such, in a brief state, I would like to explain the auxiliary verb as well as the main verb. Now, when we talk about the main verb, that's the lexical verb. They are verbs that can apparently stand on their own in certain cases, while the auxiliary verbs are verbs that help certain main verbs that can't stand on their own to actually stand on their own. That is why they are called helping verbs. Now, they are classified into about 2-3 aspects. You have verb to be, we have verb to do, we have verb to go, we have verb to have. Now, on the verb to be, we look at such helping verbs as am, is, was, are, were. All right. So now let's look at the use of auxiliary verbs in active and passive voice, practically in passive voice. Now, the passive voice is formed by using a form of the auxiliary verb be. And these are the auxiliary verb to be, am, is, are, was, were, been, and been, followed by the past participle of the main verb. Now we have a sentence in the active form, he loves me, and we want to change the sentence he loves me to passive. Apparently, like we said, I'm going to employ either of the auxiliary verbs depending on the sentence in the active voice. So he loves me, the verb love or loves is a simple present tense showing habitual action. That's what the person does. All right, so we want to change he loves me to passive voice. Remember, we said that voice is a form of a verb, and because it's a form of a verb, we'll have to change the active voice of that verb to the passive. The verbs won't remain the same again because that's what has to change. So the passive becomes I am loved. Remember, it's a rule and we'll have to run with the rule. Passive voice must go with auxiliary verbs, but that is not the case with active voice. Alright, so he loves me is changed to I am loved. Some people would say I am loved by him. Either way, it's correct. So it is I am loved by him or I am loved, changing he loves me to passive voice. Number 2 says we took our children to the circus. We took our children to the circus. Remember, in our introduction we said while changing active voice to passive voice, the object in the active voice becomes the subject. The active voice subject is moved to become the passive. So we took our children to the circus center, to the circus. The children were taken to the circus. The children were taken. We have changed the verb took. The voice has changed from took to were taken. That's the past participle of the main verb. Okay, a thief stole my money. A thief stole my money. Changing a thief stole my money to passive, we have my money was stolen by the thief or my money was stolen, whichever. So notice how the be auxiliaries change the meaning of the verbs from action to condition or from doing to being. So from doing, which is the active, we now have being, which is passive. Now let's look at these rules. It says active voice and passive voice. These are auxiliary. The active, you have the subject, you have the verb, that's your main verb, either smile or smiles, whichever, then your object. And if you're changing to auxiliary passive voice, we have objects. We no longer have the subject starting because we originally stated in the introduction that in the passive voice, object takes the place of the subject, while subject takes the place of the object. That is to say that the object begins the sentence while the subject ends the sentence. Now, active and passive voice examples with answers of present simple tense. In one of our classes, we looked at tenses and we said that tenses show us the time of an action. Tenses show the time of an action, and we have about 7 to 9 of the tenses in English. You have the simple present tense, you have simple past tense, you have present continuous tense, you have past continuous tense, you have your perfect tense, you have present perfect tense, you have past perfect tense, you have your future tense. All right, so we actually want to look at the involvement of tenses in active and passive voice. Now, looking at simple present tense, we have simple present tense divided into 4. You have simple present tense showing habitual action. You have simple present tense showing action planned, and you also have simple sentences where we want to make a quote, you want to quote something. There is an involvement of the simple present tense. But here basically we want to look at simple present tense from the angle of habitual action. So active says he reads a novel. He reads a novel. That's what he does. So apparently, as long as you want to use your auxiliary verb, you must use the present auxiliary verb. As long as we are looking at present simple tense, in changing from active to passive, it's a rule, and until you understand the rule, you may not necessarily get the answer in changing to passive. So understand that once the verb in the active voice, it's present simple tense or simple present tense, then while changing to passive voice, the auxiliary verb you will use must be in the present as well. It mustn't be in the past. All right, so let's look at examples given under the simple present tense in active and passive voice. So I have he reads a novel. Reads is the simple present tense in the active voice. Now to change, he reads a novel to passive, it will be a novel is read. A novel is read. Remember, we are bringing the object in the active to become the subject in the passive, while the object in the passive will now become the subject. Right, so he reads a novel. Passive says a novel is read. We have changed the voice of the verb from reads to is read. Right, number 2 says he does not cook food. He does not cook food. So to moving it to passive, does is simple present tense. Remember, I told us that when we are looking at verb to be's, we have, aside verb to be's, we have verb to do. So you have do, does, did, and done. So under does is a simple present tense. You can only use simple present tense does when you have a singular subject being a noun or singular subject as pronoun. So in this case, I have pronoun as in the singular subject, so it must attract does. So he does not cook food. Changing to passive would be food is not cooked by him. Is a simple present tense replacing the does, which is also simple present tense, then changing the main verb cook to past. Right, the next says, does he purchase books? Does he purchase books? Changing to passive will become, are books purchased by him? They grow plants. Plants are grown by them. And finally, she teaches me. I am taught by her. So the main focal point here is that we have changed the verb, or rather the verbs we have in these sentences, the active form verbs we have, changing it to passive. We have changed the voice from simple present tense to simple past tense. Alright, so this is active and passive voice rules for present continuous tense. When we talk about present continuous tense, we look at using our present tense alongside verbs that end with ing. Is coming, was coming, is coming, are coming. Those are practically the present continuous tense. So once I have my is, I add it to any ing type of verb that is continuous. So it's either called continuous tense or progressive. Some people refer to it as progressive, something that is ongoing. And these are the rules. So if I have my subject, I put either, I can use is, I can use am, I can use are, then my ing. Remember, we're looking at the present. So we must not go as far as using was and were, because those are past. So we're looking at present continuous tense, and each change for passive voice, I also have my object, then I have either is, am, are, plus being. As long as I have continuous tense in the active voice, when I want to change to passive voice, I must employ the auxiliary verb being under verb to be. Alright, these are examples. Remember, we are looking at present continuous tense, active voice, present continuous tense, passive voice, present continuous tense. So Rosalind is singing a song. Rosalind is singing a song. It would be wrong to say a song is sung by Rosalind. No, that would be incorrect, because we are putting away the place of the ing, and the being that ought to be there was removed. So if it were to be I had Rosalind sings a song, Rosalind sings a song, then it would be right to say a song is sung by Rosalind. But be it that I have singing, it has to go with being. A song is being sung by Rosalind. Now, Chelsea is not chopping vegetables. Chelsea is not chopping vegetables. The passive becomes vegetables are not being chopped by Chelsea. I would like to clear something. Once you are using your objects in your passive to begin the sentence, once you want to make the object in the active voice the subject in passive, Be mindful of the state of the subjects in your passive voice. If it's plural subject, then it must attract plural verb. If it's singular object, then it will attract singular verb. So I have vegetables here. Vegetables here is pluralized, so I have to use are. That's why I have to use are. Chelsea is a person, and that was why we used is. So you're not changing only the object, you as well change the verb. The object determines your choice of verb, whether it will be the plural verb or the singular verb, but you must retain the present form of the continuous. Alright, so Chelsea is not chopping vegetables. Vegetables are not being chopped by Chelsea. Is Miriam buying a table? Is a table being bought by Miriam? So you see that practically in the passive voice of the present continuous, we'll have being in all the sentences. We have our being in all the sentences. Now we have active and passive voice rules for present perfect tense. Present perfect tense, action that has already been completed but taking place in the present form. This is a rule. In your perfect tense, we have two verbs, two auxiliary verbs that operate in the perfect tense, and under the present perfect you have has and have. Under the present tense you have has and have. Has is for singular nouns or pronouns, while have is for plural nouns or pronouns. Again, in the past form for perfect tense, that's past perfect tense, we just have one verb operating as past perfect tense, and that is had. Had functions for both singular nouns and plural nouns. So once you have your had, it can go for singular and plural. But for the present perfect tense, we basically have two, has and have. So let's look at the sentences. It says Oprah has challenged her. Oprah has challenged her. So has challenged her is a present perfect tense. Remember we said action that has finished but brought to the present. So Oprah has challenged her is the present perfect tense. So we want to change it to passive. In our continuous tense, we looked at using being, the B-E-I-N-G, in the present continuous tense for passive voice, but in the present perfect tense, we'll be using the B-E-E-N. Now, what's the difference? The difference is in the usage. One is for the present and one is for past. B-E-I-N-G is for present, while B-E-N is used in the past. So if you have verb to be, you have be, been, and be. Be, been, and be. So be is for present, simple present, simple past, and past perfect tense. So she has been challenged by Oprah. Active says Brian has not written an article. On the passive voice, we have an article has not been written by Brian. So practically, while we use B-E-E-N for present perfect tense, we use B-E-I-N-G for present continuous tense. So we must have that at the back of our mind. So understanding when a sentence is in present perfect tense would help you know when to use either B-E-E-N or B-E-I-N. Active voice says, have they left the apartment? Have they left the apartment? On the active voice, we now have has the apartment been left by them? Has the apartment been left by them? She has created this masterpiece. This masterpiece has been created by him. He has read the newspaper has been read by him. Then we have active and passive voice rules for past simple tense, that's simple past tense. Now we have subject, verb, and the objects. He clapped the book or he kicked the book. Let's see what we have. So Ruth cleaned the floor. Cleaned is a past tense. It's a simple past tense. So Ruth cleaned the floor. That means the use of our auxiliary verb in a passive voice must attract auxiliary verb in the past form. We will no longer go for is, as we did when we looked at the simple present tense. In this case, we are looking at simple past tense. Remember when we looked at the simple present tense, we saw the use of our main verb in the active voice in habitual form. And in that case, we only changed to passive by applying our simple auxiliary verb, present tense auxiliary verb. But in this case, we are looking at active voice in the past tense. As such, in changing the voice from active to passive, we will apply the auxiliary verb, but in a past form. So where we have is for simple present tense, we have was for the simple past tense. So the floor was cleaned by Ruth will be the passive form of the sentence, Ruth cleaned the floor. Active voice says Aisha bought a bicycle. Aisha bought a bicycle, so it becomes a bicycle was bought by Aisha. Favor called my friends. My friends were called by Favor. Remember what I said initially? That when we are changing the sentence in the active form to passive, we must take cognizance of the object in the active voice. If the object in the active voice, it's pluralized. When we are changing to passive, we must understand that there will be a change in the verb to past to plural rather. So since we have my friends, the verb demand will be a plural verb, and that's why we have were. I believe I've cleared that. So my friends were called by Favor. Active voice says I saved him, he was saved by me, or we can say he was saved. Vika paid the bills were paid. We are changing the verb again. I didn't retain was because my object in the active voice, it's pluralized, and because I'm bringing it as subject in my passive voice, the verb has to change to were. It wouldn't retain was because there has to be concord, that is subject-verb agreement. Alright, so we have active and passive voice rules for past continuous tense. We've looked at present continuous tense where we used is with an ing type of verb. This time we're looking at past tense, past auxiliary verb with an ing type of verb. What are these past auxiliary verbs? We have was and were. Was and were. So was is used for singular noun or singular pronoun, while were is used for plural noun or plural pronoun. Remember, pronoun is used in place of a noun. So if I decide not to make use of a noun in a sentence and I choose to replace it with a pronoun to avoid monotony, that means I have to work in conjunction with that when it has to do with the verb. So Nathan was painting the wall. Nathan was painting the wall. The past continuous is was painting. That's the past continuous tense. So it's not a case of present continuous tense where I will have Nathan is painting. It's a past act being brought in the noun. So the passive becomes the wall was being painted. Remember we said it earlier that once we are working with continuous tense and we want to change it to passive, there is need to bring in the ing form of the verb to be. The ing form of the verb to be. It is used alongside with the continuous tense, while the perfect tense is used with the been form of verb to be. Now the second example says someone was repairing the car. The passive becomes the car was being repaired by Samuel. Now another example says were you reciting the poem? That's a question form active voice sentence. So if you're changing to passive voice, you still have to observe your question mark. So was the poem being recited? Was the poem being recited? One would ask, why do we have were in the active and we have was in the passive? Like I said earlier, the moment you change the subject in the active form and make it the object, or you bring the object in the active form to serve as the subject, that means there must be a change in verb, because the possibility that what you used as the object of the sentence in the active voice could be in the singular form or the plural form. So once it's in the singular form, you're demanded to make use of your singular verb. And if it's in the plural form, there is need for you to use the plural form of a verb. So where was used in the active voice in the third example because we have the pronoun you, which is a second person pronoun, and it attracts the plural verb. Then moving to the active voice, the poem, which is the object in the active voice, has been made to be the subject in the passive voice. And we're looking at poem and not poems. So for that, we'll make use of our past form of a verb while changing the passive voice, but in a singular form, because we're looking at the poem and not poems. So it becomes, was the poem being recited? It could as well be, was the poem being recited by you? It's still in the question form. The last says she was baking the cake. She was baking the cake, and the answer to the passive becomes the cake was being baked by her. Now we have active and passive voice rules for past perfect. You see, we are moving from the simple to the past. We've looked at the simple present tense. We looked at the past tense. We looked at the present continuous. We looked at the present perfect. We also saw the past continuous tense. And now we are coming to the past perfect tense. Nothing has really changed. The only thing that changed in respect to the present perfect tense and the past perfect tense is just the change of the auxiliary verb. When I introduced the present perfect tense, I told us that there are two key verbs, auxiliary verbs that are used for the present perfect tense, and they are has and have. And we use has for singular nouns and have for plural nouns. I can't possibly say she have it. It is wrong. It is grammatically wrong. That verb is not suitable for the subject, which is she. She is a singular pronoun and as such demands a singular verb. In one of our lessons, we looked at concord, and we said concord is the agreement of the subject of the sentence with the verb given. So, having said this, looking at the past perfect, we just have one auxiliary verb for the past perfect. It runs for both singular verbs and singular nouns and plural nouns, singular pronouns and singular plural pronouns. So the first example here says Davina had cleaned the floor. It's a finished work as past perfect, a work that is already finished but brought to the past. All right, so Davina, it's more like saying Davina cleaned the floor, but you want to bring it to become a past perfect. Davina had cleaned the floor. So changing Davina had cleaned the floor to passive, it becomes the floor had been cleaned by Davina. What are we bringing in? We are bringing in been, because been is a past perfect form of being. So that's why we are bringing it. Precious had not received the parcel. The parcel had not been received by Precious. It is good we understand the difference between the present continuous tense and the present perfect tense. We said the difference between the two would just be the case of the being used in continuous, because the being indicates something ongoing, but the being, been, shows a finished act That is why we're using BEN for past perfect or anything perfect tense, but we use BEING for anything continuous tense when changing to the passive voice. Now the next example says Gia had solved the doubt. Gia has solved the doubt. The doubt had been solved by Gia, or the doubt has been solved. Had they caught the thief? Had they caught the thief? So the passive becomes had the thief been caught by them? Had the thief been caught by them? Lastly, we have I had paid 50,000. I had paid 50,000. 50,000 had been paid by me. Now we have the active and passive voice rules for future tense. When we talk about future tense, we're talking about things that are not yet done, but we're looking at the possibility of that being done. And there are basically two words that we use for future tense. We call them the modal verbs, and these modal auxiliary verbs are also called secondary auxiliary verbs. When we looked at the use of auxiliary verb be, I made us understand that verbs are classified into the main verbs, that's lexical, and the auxiliary, which is the helping verb. Now, under the helping verb, we have the primary auxiliary or helping verbs, and we have the secondary auxiliary or helping verbs. Now, the primary auxiliaries are is, are, were, was, been, etc. But when we look at the modal verb, which is the secondary auxiliary, we talk about can, could, shall, should, will, would, may, might, dare not, ought to. These are what we call the modal auxiliary verbs. So for the future simple tense, we have just will and would. Will is for present, while would is for past. So let's look at the examples. Active voice says Esther will sell the bag. Esther will sell the bag. The bag will be sewn by Esther. You see, we are involving the verb be in the sentence. Alright, so Richmond will not arrange the things. Richmond will not arrange the things. The things will not be arranged by Richmond. One thing I would like us to know is that when we talk about voice, the voice you use in your active must not be the same thing. What are we saying in essence? Am I saying that you should go up when you are using your active and come down when you are using your passive? No. All what we are saying is there should be a change in verb. There should be an addition. Even if you retain what you have in the active voice, a particular verb, when you move into the passive voice, there will be an extra addition of verb or verbs in it. So you see that active Esther will sell the bag. We have added the auxiliary verb be, and as well the soul, we have changed it to past. All right. So the next is will you mop the floor? Will you mop the floor? The response in the passive becomes will the floor be mopped by you? Next says they will post the letter. The letter will be posted by them, or the letter will be posted. Then Ruth will save money. Ruth will save money. Money will be saved by Ruth. Now, notice that once you use your preposition in the passive voice, the pronoun must be in the object case. It is out of place for you to retain the subject form of a pronoun in the passive voice as long as you have a preposition before the pronoun. Now, active and passive voice rules for future perfect. Future perfect is being perfected, it's been done. We're looking at it in the future. So they will have brought the toy. Remember the perfect tense, we said we have just two verbs, have and has. Have for plural, has for singular. So they will have brought the toy. The toy will have been brought by them. Nefertiti will not have changed the table. the table cover. The table cover will not have been changed by Nefertiti. Had it been, I said she will not have changed the table cover, and I want to change to passive voice. The table cover will not have been changed by her. I can't say the tablecloth will not have been changed by she. It is wrong. Why? Because by is a preposition, and the rule says that once you have a preposition before a pronoun, that pronoun choice has to be the object pronoun choice. We have treated that in one of our lessons, the use of pronouns and how they apply in sentences. So the next is, will she have written the notes? Will she have written the notes? Will the notes have been written by her? They will have won the match. The match will have been won by them. You see it? In the active voice we have they, and in the passive we're changing the they to them, basically because we have the preposition by before them. Finally, we have Jesse will have washed a shirt. A shirt will have been washed by Jesse. Okay, now these are the tasks that we have. Okay, so what we have to, before we go through the task, let us look at some activities from our exam guide. Let's look at some of the activities in our exam guide. We'll look at okay, let's check 2019. Let's see what we have there. Which topic? Active and passive voice. All right, so this is it. We have active voices. I bought the book. Remember, bought is in the past. So obviously, if we are going to change to passive voice, we must do well to use the past auxiliary verb in the sentence. So passive voice is, the book dash bought by me. So apparently we are going to have was. The book was bought by me. All right, so that's the answer. Let's also check another year. All right, this is it. We have active voice. The employee sued the company. Sued is in the past form. Remember, it's the verb we look at. So sued is in the past form. So if I'm changing to passive voice, I must make sure to apply the rule. So since in the active voice I have sued, the auxiliary verb I'll have to choose to create the right passive voice form will also be in the past. So we have the company dash sued by the employee. The company was sued by the employee. All right, I would like that you make use of your exam guide in answering other questions on active and passive voice to check how far you have learned. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and practice mode. It also has other features that make learning fun. It is a must-have for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to people that will benefit from it. Bye.